trade wars. I've been saying for a long time that I think the World War III is really a war of information and money. I'm still hoping that's true. Unfortunately, it's looking like it might be going more towards a hot war. Let's certainly hope not. But if we're looking at the financial war, we can see things really seem to get kicked off into sort of high gear. Maybe when Trump was in and we sort of had these tariffs started to happen with China, and that has just continued on. A lot of it has been seemingly a shift towards trying to kind of keep China in their place, trying to keep them from rising up and challenging the United States, which is interesting because you might also argue there's people in the United States, Biden crime family, like that want to see China rise up. But that's because there's lots of warring factions in the United States, and there's certainly some, specifically the military, that sees China as a threat. Now, I've covered this in the past. I made a whole YouTube video about it as well on my main YouTube channel, just Mark Moss, talking about how basically the United States sent China back to the dark ages. And what do I mean by that? Well, the Biden administration had continued to escalate things and had cut China off from receiving microchips, specifically level 2 and level 3. There's basically 3 levels of microchips. Level 1 being just like the super most basic that go in like an old school alarm clock. And then level 2, level 3 being the very most advanced chips that you would need for AI, iPhones, things like that. And so the Biden administration had decided to basically take those more advanced chips away from China, and not just the chips, but everything that they need around manufacturing and servicing around those chips. And so there were sanctions placed on all the manufacturers, even other nations that supply those parts and machines to China. And so I kind of made the case that this literally sends them back to the dark ages, because without advanced microchips, you basically don't have technology. I mean, again, you don't have iPhones, like you don't have AI, you don't have any of these things. And so this was going to be a very, very big deal. Now, of course, China's not happy about that. They've retaliated. I've covered this, I think, on my main YouTube channel as well, where they said, okay, then we'll ban exports to you. And so then China banned the United States from getting a couple key commodities that we really need, gallium and germanium. Those are commodities that are used for in the EV space, for renewable energy, things like that. And so, of course, the United States has this policy to transition everything into renewables, unreliables, if you will, and it's going to be very difficult without those exports. China said that, why would we continue to export our finite materials to a nation that we're not friendly with, right? And so they're escalating this war, and it took another turn for the worse. Well, worse if you're China, I suppose. And basically, we saw this week the U.S. Commerce Department set new rules on semiconductor exports, limiting the ability of American chip-making companies like NVIDIA and Intel to sell AI chips to China. So basically, what we're seeing is the Biden administration is continuing to tighten the restrictions on China's ability to buy these advanced semiconductors. And this, of course, fuels the friction with U.S. businesses that sell to China, to the Chinese market. So if you're NVIDIA and if you're in Intel, and now you can't sell your products to China anymore, that's a pretty big deal. That's a pretty big deal. Now, the Commerce Department said Tuesday that it would significantly constrict exports of artificial intelligence chips, making it tougher for U.S. companies to sell their chips. Or to introduce new chips to circumvent the rules. And so that's part of this. So capitalism for what it is, everyone's trying to figure out ways to get around this, and so they're trying to tighten that noose, circumvent the rules to do that. Now, the goal, according to Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo, said, is to limit China's access to advanced semiconductors that could fuel breakthroughs in artificial intelligence and sophisticated computers. Of course they are. They want to keep them in the dark ages. Now, these chips, the U.S. doesn't want China to have them, and at the same time, they're critical for China, for the Chinese, right? Obviously, that's why they're trying to cut them off. They're not just critical for the Chinese; they're critical for Chinese military applications, she said. And this is a nod to the concerns that the U.S. could fall behind China in key defense technologies. Now, the updated rules significantly expand the U.S. government's authority to determine what products U.S. companies can and can't sell in the name of national security. Of course, everything's a matter of national security today. Everything. And of course, in times of war, then we just continue to expand those rules of national security. And pretty much everything's a war today. As a matter of fact, I was thinking about this the other day. Pretty much everything the government declares as a war gets worse, not better. So I was just thinking that, like, since 1971, I believe, the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Agency, was formed. And since then, the U.S. has spent trillions of dollars fighting the war on drugs, but yet drugs are bigger, and they're a bigger problem today than they ever have been. So when they put the war on drugs weren't really a problem. And as a matter of fact, most drugs were just legal in the United States. I think cocaine and ecstasy and things like that, they were fine. There wasn't a big problem. Now, after making it a war and spending trillions of dollars, drugs are the biggest problem. As a matter of fact, it's the number one cause of death for 18 to 35-year-olds. We've emboldened the drug cartels down in Mexico. Now they're billion-dollar, potentially trillion-dollar businesses because we fought a war on drugs, just making it worse. We have a war on obesity, but yet obesity is worse than it's ever been. It's like the main cause of death in the United States. We have a war on poverty, but yet today we have more poor people than any time in history. Well, I don't want to say any time in history. That's maybe a little bit of an exaggeration, but there's a reason why we have people striking all throughout the United States. I reported earlier that home prices are up now 50%. Not home prices, but the home payments are up 50% in the last 3 years, but wages haven't kept up with it. So this war on poverty isn't really helping, and so we have a war on terrorism, right? They've signaled this war on terrorism, spent, I don't even know if we added it up, probably $20-30 trillion on terrorism, and yet terrorism is a bigger, worse problem today than it was before. And so every war that the government declares just seems to get bigger, just seems to get worse, and now here we have a war with China. And if history is our guide, unfortunately, it's probably only going to get bigger and worse, which of course it does, right? That's what happens with wars. That's what happens with fights. You get escalation, right? I call you a name, you threaten me, I push you, you punch me, I get a knife, you get a gun, and we just escalate from there until cooler heads prevail, until people are able to sit down, think about this clearly, and come up with some sort of resolution. Now, in a situation like this, where the U.S. is afraid that China will overtake us, that's a legitimate concern. Something they probably should have thought about 20 years ago before they shipped all our manufacturing off to China. Today, it's sort of like what we say, closing the barn door after the cows are already gone, so to speak. And so now it's a much bigger problem, and I'm not really sure where this goes. But I can tell you it's going to be a rocky road, not just for the relationship between China, what potentially China may do with Taiwan, which I was looking today before the show to see if I could find like some sort of betting markets. So typically there's betting markets where you can like place wagers on who will be the next president, things like that. I wasn't able to find one, but if I had to guess, I'm guessing there's at least a 75% chance that China goes after Taiwan, and there's not a lot we can do with it. So it certainly continues to add towards that. It continues to be a drag on U.S. businesses like NVIDIA and Intel, and so we'll keep you up to date on what's going on with this.